A mighty empire collapses overnight. A foreign king is called the Anointed One by the Bible. A decree changes the fate of the entire Jewish nation. King Cyrus the Great, a great warrior or an instrument in God's plan? The Cyrus Cylinder, a clay cylinder from 2,500 years ago, is it proof of fulfilled biblical prophecy? Isaiah 45:1, God says, "This is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of." But how could a pagan king of the Persian Empire be used by God to fulfill biblical prophecy? A mere coincidence or strong historical evidence of God's plan? Join The Truth About Bible Prophecy to explore the truth behind the Cyrus Cylinder and Cyrus's miraculous role in Jewish history, a story prophesied hundreds of years before it happened. Ancient Persia often evokes images of a mythical realm where opulent palaces and tales of fantastic adventures resonate. However, behind this mythical veil, Persian history holds incredibly important evidence, connecting various faiths and religious texts. One surprising testament to this connection is the figure of the great King Cyrus the Great and a clay cylinder recording his conquests and policies. This story from 2,500 years ago, though originating in the turbulent Middle East, continues to subtly influence how we perceive politics, religion, and history to this day. Persia, the land corresponding to modern-day Iran, was situated at the crossroads of diverse cultures. Around the 6th century BC, when speaking of the powerful empire in the Mesopotamian region, many immediately thought of Babylon. This Babylon had a long history and was renowned for its magnificent structures, especially the Hanging Gardens, once hailed as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Among those under Babylonian rule were the Jewish people, as King Nebuchadnezzar II had conquered and destroyed Jerusalem. The Jewish temple lay in ruins, and the Jews lived in exile, enduring much bitterness. The Old Testament, particularly Psalm 137, records the mournful laments of the Jewish people by the rivers of Babylon. They yearned for the day they could return home, hoping that God would intervene and end their sorrowful exile. Many prophecies arose, proclaiming that their hardship would not last forever. Meanwhile, the land of Persia rose to prominence. Initially, it was not a great empire, but consisted of a small tribe, united with other tribes, especially the Medes. But over time, they grew powerful, led by an extraordinary figure, King Cyrus. He expanded his influence, gradually approaching Mesopotamia, where Babylon reigned. In 539 BC, a spectacular event took place. Cyrus's army entered Babylon, almost without a bloody battle. According to legends passed down by contemporaries, they employed clever tactics, diverting the river to enter the city, causing Babylon's unexpected downfall. The Old Testament, in Daniel chapter 5, also records a symbolic scene. King Belshazzar, a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar, was holding a lavish banquet and dared to use sacred objects from the temple in Jerusalem when a mysterious hand appeared, writing a warning on the wall. That very night, the Persian army captured the city, and Babylon fell. From then on, Cyrus's Persian Empire became the dominant power in the Middle East, and his descendants succeeded him, expanding and consolidating the empire for about 200 years until Alexander the Great's conquest in the 4th century BC. But the most surprising aspect was not just this extraordinary military achievement, but also Cyrus's unusually tolerant policies. Instead of oppressing the conquered peoples, he granted them many freedoms, including the right to practice their own religions. This choice brings us to the story of the Jewish people. From a biblical perspective, Cyrus was not just a conquering king, but also an instrument used by God to liberate the people exiled since the time of Nebuchadnezzar. The books of Ezra, Nehemiah, and 2 Chronicles all recount Cyrus's decree, allowing the Jews to return to their homeland, rebuild the temple, and worship Jehovah. In the Jewish mind, this was the fulfillment of God's promises that the exile would end. Ezra 1:1-3 specifically states, "In the first year of Cyrus king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus king of Persia." This biblical book views Cyrus's decree as an act of grace, leading to the Jewish people packing their belongings and crossing the desert back to their ancestral land. Then, for the first time in decades, they were able to rebuild their homeland and reconstruct the temple. But was the existence of this decree a reality, or just a legendary story? Everything became clearer when archaeologists in the 19th century excavated the ruins of Babylon. In 1879, amidst rubble and silt, a small clay cylinder, less than 30 centimeters long and with several cracks, was discovered. The entire cylinder was inscribed with Babylonian cuneiform. Initially, no one suspected that this humble object could shake the world of archaeology and biblical studies so profoundly. Upon deciphering its contents, they realized that the cylinder contained a declaration from King Cyrus, recounting his conquest of Babylon through the grace of the god Marduk, and proclaiming that he would return statues and religious objects to the peoples enslaved by Babylon. It was this promise of freedom, allowing them to return with their sacred objects, that created a clear intersection with the biblical narrative. From this point, the world became aware of the Cyrus Cylinder. Archaeologists dubbed it the first human rights charter, though this description remains debated. It was called so because the ideas within were very progressive compared to ancient standards, when many empires sought to impose a unified religion. The evidence lies in the fact that Cyrus did not force the conquered peoples to worship a single god, but allowed each nation to worship its own gods, even returning stolen statues. Some compare the Cyrus Cylinder to the policies of other empires, recognizing the difference. Powers like Assyria or Babylon often forced conquered peoples to worship the gods of the victors, abolishing their original spiritual heritage. Cyrus, on the other hand, recognized that each person should return to venerate their own gods. From this, we see the logic in the Jewish narrative. They were among the conquered peoples, and while the Cyrus Cylinder doesn't explicitly name the Jews, it refers generally to all those previously taken captive by Babylon who had gods or objects of worship. This alignment allowed the Jewish people, according to the Bible, to return home. From a religious perspective, the Bible states, "The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus," and Isaiah 45:1 says that God anointed him. This is how the Bible explains the true reason behind a foreign king showing favor to God's people. Conversely, reading the Cyrus Cylinder, we see Marduk, the chief god of Babylon, mentioned as being on Cyrus's side. The Babylonians believed that because Marduk was dissatisfied with the previous king, he bestowed glory upon Cyrus. Thus, it's not surprising that the two accounts differ on which god provided assistance, but agree on the event and outcome of the exiled peoples returning. Compared to the Bible, this is the fulfillment of Jeremiah's prophecy, who had said that the exile would end. This is what the Lord says, "When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place." Furthermore, Isaiah 44:28 affirms, "Who says of Cyrus, 'He is my shepherd, and will accomplish all that I please.' He will say of Jerusalem, 'Let it be rebuilt,' and of the temple, 'Let its foundations be laid.'" There's undeniable debate about the dating of the book of Isaiah, but the content of the official Old Testament text accepts this as God's word declared before the event. It's quite surprising, as the Bible never calls a pagan king by the title "anointed one" in this way, except in the case of Cyrus. Therefore, those who believe in the Bible are further convinced that God can use anyone, regardless of ethnicity or faith, to accomplish his higher purpose. Those outside of religious faith might view Cyrus's actions as a political and social peak, enacting a tolerant policy to preserve his vast empire. Regardless of perspective, the end result was Babylon crumbled, the Persian Empire became powerful, and the Jewish people escaped captivity. Historically, this was a major turning point for the Middle East. Religiously, it marked Israel's return to their land and the re-establishment of the Temple in Jerusalem. In fact, the books of Ezra and Nehemiah later describe in detail the process of the Jews returning, group by group, including the rebuilding of the city walls and overcoming various obstacles. It's clear that if Cyrus hadn't issued the decree, they could hardly have accomplished this. When the Cyrus Cylinder was excavated, many initially paid little attention. But then, comparing the text on it with the Bible, scholars became very excited. On one side was archaeological evidence from the Persian era, and on the other, Jewish Christian religious texts. They revealed a shared history, confirming the Old Testament's accuracy regarding this event. This discovery also played a vital role in the field called biblical archaeology. Many archaeologists have used the Cyrus Cylinder as a prime example demonstrating that the ancient stories of the Bible, though imbued with the divine, align with historical reality. Of course, in the Cyrus Cylinder, Cyrus doesn't mention the God of Israel or the Temple in Jerusalem. He mainly praises Marduk, emphasizing that he was empowered by Marduk. However, the wording about returning the statues of the gods of the exiled peoples to their places of origin completely aligns with the meaning of each nation returning to its homeland to worship. This provides sufficient basis to conclude that the Jewish people also benefited from this policy. Another noteworthy point is the pluralistic spirit of the Persian Empire. Many historians consider the Achaemenid Persian Empire the first multi-ethnic, multi-religious empire organized on such a vast scale. Later, Alexander the Great, although learning from this to some extent, caused the harmony of this empire to disintegrate with his Hellenistic expansion. This shows that Cyrus's goodwill helped him build a relatively stable foundation for the empire, lasting for 2 centuries. Meanwhile, for the Jewish people, returning to their homeland marked a significant milestone. They were able to re-establish their religious practices. In terms of faith, this period helped them strengthen their identity before entering the Second Temple period, where many religious and scholarly activities flourished, contributing to the formation of a Jewish landscape very different from before their exile. For the Christian community, the story of Cyrus also carries profound meaning. If Israel hadn't returned, the history of salvation might have taken a different path. Throughout time, the Old Testament has been the foundation preparing for the New Testament. Of course, we don't assert definitively that, without Cyrus, the plan of salvation would have failed. But clearly, this played a crucial role in preserving the nation and the land where, according to Christian belief, Jesus was later born. From a small artifact, a palm-sized cylinder turned out to contain a big idea: acceptance of the customs and religions of different regions. Over 2,500 years ago, this awareness was not common. Therefore, some researchers describe the Cyrus Cylinder as the earliest declaration of human rights, though it must be understood within the framework of ancient language and context. Cyrus himself was still an emperor, still praising himself. But the humanitarian aspect of the decree liberating religious prisoners is truly remarkable. Relating to prophecy, we clearly see the example of Jeremiah 29:10, or Isaiah 44:28, 45:1, 2 Chronicles 36:22-23, Ezra 1:1-4. Each biblical passage affirms that Cyrus was God's arm to bring the Jewish people back at the right time. When comparing these passages with the Cyrus Cylinder, archaeologists find no factual conflict, only religious differences. The cylinder centers on Marduk, while the Bible glorifies Jehovah. Of course, many still offer a purely political perspective that Cyrus wanted to appease all gods, to build a peaceful empire. However, this doesn't negate the prophetic value in Jewish faith. Cyrus's unexpected victory over Babylon, coupled with his active repatriation efforts, truly fulfilled the predictions in the Bible. Individually, Cyrus was not a believer in the same way as an Israelite king, but the Bible praises him, bestowing the title Anointed One. This further highlights a theme. God can act through any means, any person, not limited by religious boundaries. As the story spread through the centuries, Cyrus was perceived in various ways by later generations. Greek thinkers like Xenophon wrote Cyropedia, praising him as an ideal leader. Later, in Renaissance Europe, many anecdotes about Cyrus were also studied, sometimes compared to principles of statecraft. In present-day Iran, he has become a national historical symbol, proudly called the father of the country by many. It's no wonder that whenever the Cyrus Cylinder is exhibited in Tehran, crowds queue for hours just to admire it, take pictures, and feel the heroic yet humane spirit from that ancient story. In a religious context, the Cyrus Cylinder helps demonstrate that the Old Testament has historical validity, not just theology. The return of the Jewish people was fundamental for their later development, establishing a new Jewish community in Jerusalem, where they restored rituals and traditions, then opened a new chapter in history, preparing for the following centuries. All these movements are seen as providence when read in the light of Isaiah or Daniel. On the other hand, the Cyrus Cylinder helps us visualize the power of prophecy connected to current events. Instead of empty words, biblical prophecies repeatedly mentioned Babylon's fall, the 70 years, and then God's people returning, and a king who would appear to do this. Combining these elements, we cannot consider it a coincidence. From 2,500 years ago, the Mesopotamian region experienced a power shift, ending the Babylonian Empire and giving rise to Persia. And it was thanks to Persia that the Jewish nation was revived. Therefore, it can be said that Cyrus and his cylinder are key to understanding why the Bible asserts that history is in God's hands. For those seeking an example of religious tolerance in human history, the lesson from the Persian Empire is invaluable. The relatively long existence of this empire, about 2 centuries before the Greek invasion, also suggests that a policy of harmony and respect for religious diversity contributes to inner strength. It's unfortunate that in many later periods, ideological or religious wars resumed, shattering that positive spirit. Looking at the present, with ongoing tensions in many parts of the Middle East, people often forget that this land once witnessed a Cyrus willing to let conquered peoples maintain their culture and beliefs. The liberation of the Jewish people to rebuild their temple is one of the most prominent examples, transmitted globally through the Bible. Of course, we cannot idealize everything. Ultimately, Cyrus was still a conqueror, still consolidating his power through harsh measures when necessary. However, his tolerance in the context of ancient times is still worthy of praise, especially since he, or his court, decided to draft the Declaration on a clay cylinder, an initiative that can be considered earlier than the concept of religious freedom that the West only formally systematized later. From a biblical perspective, many wonder, why would God use a king who doesn't believe in Jerusalem to support his people? That's precisely the element that creates the mystery. The Bible claims that God is omnipotent, transcends all boundaries, and can choose anyone to be his servant. The phrase, "I have anointed Cyrus," clearly outlines this spirit. Indirectly, the Bible also shows the world that God is not bound to any nation or religion. While the cylinder praises Marduk, the Bible extols Jehovah. Both texts tell a common core narrative, leaving archaeologists and religious scholars forever impressed by the intersection of history. Thus, whether we believe in prophecy or view it as a post-event record, we cannot deny that Cyrus truly shone, paving the way for the restoration of Israel and turning Babylon into a defeated land. Today, The Cyrus Cylinder is displayed in the British Museum, occasionally loaned for exhibitions in Tehran and elsewhere. The cylinder is slightly distorted, with some broken parts, but the Babylonian script is still clear. Anyone who sees it is surprised to learn that this tiny object once played a crucial role in demonstrating a period of great change. Many scholars assert this evidence puts an end to doubts about the authenticity of the Jewish return from exile. Others are excited to find the connection between the Bible and archaeology, a topic often debated. It can be said that this silent cylinder, after millennia underground, now speaks of religious tolerance, of an ancient empire that advocated for conquered communities to restore their rituals. It also indirectly confirms that King Cyrus, according to the Bible, made the decision to allow the Jewish people to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. From there, the book of Ezra recounts, "Whoever among you is of his people, may his God be with him. Let him go to Jerusalem and build the house of the Lord, the God of Israel." There's no doubt that the prophecies about Babylon's fall, the 70 years of exile, and a foreign king liberating them were all realized on the stage of history. A milestone for God's people, it also creates a unique picture of the Persian Empire. As we conclude this journey of contemplation, we suddenly realize a melody. Although Babylon was majestic, although Nebuchadnezzar was once powerful, all faded when God decreed the time. King Cyrus, a foreigner, became the great liberator of God's people, an unprecedented case throughout the Old Testament. It was the Jewish people who then returned, rebuilt the temple, and continued to write the scriptures that have been passed down to later generations. For thousands of years, this story has been retold in the Jewish Christian community with gratitude. God not only uses the descendants of Abraham, but he can also use Gentiles. For scholars, Cyrus's actions reflect geopolitical wisdom, while the Bible firmly believes it was God's will. One story, multiple perspectives, but perfectly intertwined historically. And of course, the cylinder remains, like a time marker, confirming for today's generation that there was once a king who enacted an unprecedented policy of tolerance. Ultimately, the most important thing is that people learn the lesson of tolerance and respect for faith. Even millennia ago, in a less developed world, a ray of hope shone that religious differences could be reconciled. The cylinder is not a dazzling treasure, but the message it carries is invaluable for our present age, where conflicts of belief still occur. And in this faith-filled symphony, the Bible has given us an ideal example. When God acts, he can elevate a foreign king to be a shepherd for his people. As for the Jewish people, they believe that God guides the course of history so that, at the appointed time, they could return to rebuild the temple and revive their dream in their homeland. Seeing how God orchestrated it, they are further assured that, if God promises, it will surely come to pass. The lesson about King Cyrus, the Cyrus Cylinder, and biblical prophecy thus not only belongs to the past, but also resonates with the modern mind. History can validate faith, and conversely, faith can give higher meaning to historical events. This is also why this story continues to hold immense appeal, sparking a desire for research, and above all, guiding us towards a spirit of respect and cooperation between faiths. Hopefully, the insights shared in this video have helped you better understand the prophecies in the Bible and strengthen your faith in God.